Just asking me about what kind of wildlife we can find, what kind of wild animals we're going to find in Iceland. I'll be honest, not a lot. As I mentioned earlier on, most of our wildlife is in the form of birds. Got loads of birds. We've seen plenty of them. Like I said, most of them are migrating birds, but not all of them. We got like, I've seen at least a couple today of whooper swans, these big white swans we have here. Might have seen them here and there, usually out in the fields. I saw a couple earlier with some cygnets, aren't they called? Baby swans? Cygnets. Yeah, we have like some birds. I saw 2 ravens earlier. Icelandic ravens are amazing because they're really big. I don't know why Icelandic ravens are so much bigger than... I mean, I grew up in England and I never remember ravens being as big as they are here. So we've got these big black ravens, and we've got various other birds that will stick around throughout the whole year. But regarding like land animals, you could say with only one exception, every land animal in this country was brought here by people, whether this was done intentionally or unintentionally. Well, for example, of course, the domestic animals were all brought over here intentionally. We needed these animals to survive. They came over during a relatively short period in our history, in fact, that we call the settlement era. It spans from the year 874, when our first settler arrived here, to the year 930. That's a very important year in Iceland. If you did the Golden Circle, you'd have probably heard all about when Iceland's parliament was established. So Iceland's parliament was established in 930. So 874 to 930, the settlement era. But regarding the wild land animals, we brought most of them with us as well. Unintentionally, for example, rodents. With ships, especially in olden times when people were maybe not quite as clean as they are today. With ships, you would have rodents. We have various breeds of mice and rats that frequent that you'll find in places all around Iceland. But we have some other rodents as well that were deliberately brought here. For example, rabbits. And fun enough, you're not going to see rabbits in places like where we are now, out here in the open countryside. You'll only find them in 2 places in Iceland. The town of Akureyri up in the north of the country, and the city of Reykjavik in the southwest. So our wild rabbits are actually descendants of domesticated rabbits that have escaped, found safe havens in green areas of our towns, and have yeah, it could just be they were just released as well. But pardon the pun, they've gone on to breed like rabbits, and yeah, we got rabbits in various places, like in Reykjavik and Akureyri up in the north. And then one other rodent we have here is mink. The mink were brought here. This was a bit of an ecological disaster. What happened was, back in the 1930s, Icelandic farmers looking for ways to make some extra income were looking at what farmers in neighbouring countries were doing. And what was very popular in Denmark at this time was mink farming. Mink are like these thin, long rodents, kind of like stoats or weasels. But they got a really, really soft fur, and their fur is very valuable. This is why people tend to farm these animals. So Icelandic farmers thought, that's a brilliant idea, we could do that in Iceland as well. A professor at the university said, I wouldn't do that. You know, mink are known escape artists. And he said, I believe that they would thrive in Icelandic nature, and who knows what kind of impact this might have on our ecosystem. Well, the farmers, they decided to ignore this good advice. Sure enough, I think about 2 months after the first mink farm started operation, we had the first mass outbreak of mink. Today we find them all over the island. They've spread out all over the place, and they've been proven to cause a bit of a problem because they share a similar diet to that of the only animal that was already here before people were even here. Foxes. Arctic fox. And how do we know that they were here ahead of us? Well, again, I keep leaning on the information of Ari the Learned. In his book of settlement, he does talk about the flora and fauna of Iceland. And he does inform us that when the settlers arrived, there was a small furry friend here to welcome them on their arrival, the Arctic fox. And we know that, well, how long the foxes have been here, we don't really know, and how they got here, technically, we don't really know. We have a theory. What's believed to have happened is that at some point the Greenland sea froze over. Might even go all the way back to the Ice Age. The fox trotted over on the ice, and when the ice melted, the fox was left behind. This is how we believe the foxes managed to find their way over here. But again, it's really nothing more than a theory. But we do know, we have clear evidence that they were here long before us. We know that the first settlers came here about 1,200 years ago. We found fox remains here in Iceland dating back about 3,000 years. So they've been here at least twice as long as we've been here. So yeah, they've definitely been here for a while. But like I said, the mink and the foxes, they share a similar diet, but unfortunately the mink are considerably better predators than the foxes. So food is getting more and more scarce for the foxes, and what does an animal do when it gets hungry? It's going to start going for slightly larger prey. Well, we're seeing more and more cases of foxes attacking sheep and lambs. And as I'm sure you can guess, Icelandic farmers are not very happy with this. But I mean, what can you do? I mean, an animal's going to do what it needs to do to survive. I'm sure human beings have done way worse things in the past in the name of survival. Oh, since they've materialised, I want to point them out while we still can. Ahead of us to the right, no, to the left, sorry. We can actually, well, as I say that, they disappear out of view. But once we drive up this little hill, we can actually see the Westman Islands. I was really hoping we'd see them at some point today. So in case we don't get a better view, you can see about 10:30 ahead of us to the left. This is a brief sight of the Westman Islands. I'm hoping it'll open up a little bit better later on. We can get a slightly better view. Farmers laying out traps or shooting the foxes, which is just making their lives even harder. So I feel a bit sorry for the foxes. But at the same time, I can understand the farmers' perspectives as well, because obviously he or she wants to protect his or her livestock. Makes perfect sense. But anyway, that's the foxes. Finally, we got one more wild animal here. That the biggest land animal in Iceland, reindeer. The reindeer were brought here during a very, very difficult period in Icelandic history. The name says it all. We call this time period Óðuharðindi, which means the haze difficulties. It was the decade or so following the worst volcanic eruption in recorded history in Iceland. And it was pretty bad. I mean, well, I say pretty bad. It would have... I'm still amazed that Icelanders survived the haze difficulties. What basically happened was we had this eruption in a place called Laki in the southern highlands. Again, unfortunately, way further down the road than we went today. So after Vik, you'd have to carry on driving for about a further hour before you would get to the vicinity of Laki where this eruption took place. And it was, well, it was what was called a fissure eruption. Most of the eruptions in Iceland are fissure eruptions, where what happens is a big fissure or a big crack opens up in the landscape, and all this lava comes up. Now the lava is not so much the problem, except in this one. I mean, it did go on to actually form one of the biggest lava fields on the planet. Eldhraun, the lava field that came up from it, is about 500 square kilometers. So I mean, don't get me wrong, sure, loads and loads of lava came up. But the real problem with the Laki eruption was a combination of the gases and the ash. Now, I was telling you earlier about these explosion eruptions that cause a very fine ash. Well, this wasn't an explosion eruption, yet the ash produced from the Laki eruption was very, very fine. So the gas has lifted all this fine ash way up into the atmosphere, where it's spread out like a big black umbrella, covered a large portion of the northern hemisphere. I mean, there are written reports from this time period from places everywhere from Canada all the way down to Turkey, where people talk about how it's a bit dim, or for some reason the sun's not shining as bright as it usually does, or something like this. So people were seeing the effects of this ash cloud over a huge area. And the closer you got to Europe, of course, no, to Iceland, of course, the worse it was. Here in Iceland, there was no daylight for 3 years. Can you even imagine 3 years of constant darkness? This meant, because the sun couldn't properly penetrate this ash cloud, it meant not a lot was growing on the ground. People couldn't produce food, they couldn't feed their animals, and we saw mass starvation in Iceland. I mean, in the decade or so following the Laki eruption, around 4/5 of the population of Iceland died of starvation. So it would have been a really, really horrible time to be alive. I mean, you can hardly imagine it. Such extreme poverty and lack of food. So, yeah, loads and loads of people died during this time period. Nearby countries are heavily affected. I often say that the Laki eruption is the one that's had the biggest impact on the world as we know it today, because this ash cloud went over a large portion of Europe and blocked out the sun over there as well. One of the interesting things, so there's this kind of a museum up in the north of the country that covers this time period, the haze difficulties. And one of the things they had on display, which I found was quite interesting, was statistics. They had these two plaques side by side with deaths recorded in the UK. On one of them, it was throughout the year of 1783, the year that the Laki eruption began. Next to it was 1785, only 2 years later. Well, in 1785, there were 23,000 more recorded deaths than throughout the year of 1783. 23,000, and that's believed to be directly affected by failing crops. And in Britain as well, people were dying of starvation. Another country not far away from Iceland, France. France got heavily affected by it for years to come. So even 6 years after the Laki eruption had begun, it got to the point where the poorest of the poor in France, after years of failing crops, went to their queen. They said, "Mary, you've got to help us out here. We're starving. We can't produce enough bread." To which one story says that she responded by saying, "Well, why don't you eat cake?" I actually heard she never said that, but you know the story. It basically got to the point where the poorest of the poor in France decided their monarchy was not doing enough for them, and they decided to revolt against their monarchy. So, a little known fact, the French Revolution, the birth of modern democracy as we know it today, was actually kick-started by a volcanic eruption in Iceland, causing crops to fail. Oh, I didn't expect we'd see it today, but look to the right. This is the glacier Eyjafjallajökull. I was really not expecting we'd see it, but there's that one hole in the clouds, and there it is. All that black stuff on it, I'm sure you can guess what that is. Volcanic ash. It was this glacier back in 2010. We had an eruption underneath it, and it shut down air traffic all over Europe. So that ash, all that black stuff you're seeing, that is volcanic ash from that eruption back in 2010. Wow, what a treat. I really was not expecting we would see any of Eyjafjallajökull today. So that was fantastic. Just completely opened up. Okay, I'm not sure if it's just about to close up, whether it will or won't, but we were thinking we'd maybe take a quick stop. There's this viewing area here where you can get a view of Eyjafjallajökull. So we're going to take a photo stop. I'm hoping it doesn't all close up by the time we get there. But at least once we do get there, there are these boards there with pictures taken here during the eruption. You can see what this place looked like when that eruption was ongoing. It was quite a sight. And like I said, hopefully we'll still be able to see some of the glacier by the time we get here. You can see here to the left this long path, so you can walk all the way down to get the best possible view. And I'm not going to give any time for this stop, just however long it takes to jump out, snap off some pictures, and then we will continue on our way. And I'll finish the story about the reindeer maybe.
Já, þetta kom mér vel á óvart. Mér datt aldrei í hug að við myndum sjá neitt. En það bara þessi litlu gati þarna.